Hey everybody, welcome back to Living Traditions Homestead. Today is the final day for these Freedom Rangers here on the homestead. Today we're going to process the rest of them. They're 10.5 weeks old. Our goal was to get them to 10 weeks, but the weather just didn't cooperate earlier this week. So we're processing them today at 10.5 weeks old. The weather isn't really cooperating today either. We woke up to a bunch of snow last night. But we need to get them done. It's time. The weather's only going to get worse from here on out. So today's the day to process these Freedom Ranger chickens.
We will also be comparing all of the nerdy chicken math, comparing the Cornish cross with the Freedom Rangers. We'll be able to get to that as soon as we're done with all of the processing. But we've got a lot of setup to do. We've got 22 chickens to process today and a very small window of time where the weather is going to be good enough to do that. So we need to get started with our day.
Alright, so I wanted to show you guys something as we're processing these Freedom Rangers. If you remember the video we did a couple weeks ago when we processed the Cornish cross, we showed you the inside, the carcass of the Cornish cross, because a lot of you had said that you thought maybe the Cornish would end up being a lot fattier of a bird because they're a lot bigger. So I wanted to show you the difference. Inside the Cornish there was virtually no fat. You don't find any fat deposits inside of the Cornish. But I wanted to show you inside of this Freedom Ranger here. You can see there is a lot of fat on these Freedom Rangers. They're considerably smaller in general, but there's also I would say a considerable amount of fat, a big layer of fat on the inside of them. So I just wanted to show you guys that to address that concern. I'm sure it's because they're older. Older animals tend to have more fat on them than younger animals, so we'll see if that turns into flavor or what happens when we do the taste test. Well, it's been a long day. We got all of those Freedom Rangers processed and we're back inside, and it's time to go over the final numbers. Sarah has the numbers for the Freedom Rangers. I have the copy of the numbers from the Cornish cross on week 8, which is when we processed those. So we're going to first go over the numbers of the Freedom Rangers, and then we'll compare it to the Cornish, and we'll go over some cost analysis as well.
So let's talk about the Freedom Rangers. Now, just as a review, when we ordered the chicks, we normally always, with the Cornish cross, we order roosters. We order all males, and we did that when we ordered the Cornish cross this year. When we ordered the Freedom Rangers, we actually forgot to say males only, so we have a mixture of males and females within the Freedom Ranger batch. I have the information for all 25 of them, but we also have separated out the numbers of just the roosters so that we can compare the averages of those to the averages of the Cornish cross, just so we can be comparing roosters with roosters. But I'm going to start out with the information for all of the Freedom Rangers together. So this is 10.5 weeks for these Freedom Rangers. Their average live weight altogether is 5.92 pounds. Their average carcass weight after we processed them was 4.22 pounds. And that gives us a live to carcass percentage of about 71%, which means 29% of their body weight ended up being feet and feathers and their innards.
Right.
Basically, but 71% of their live weight was left, okay? The feed that they consumed total per bird from the time that they arrived on our homestead to the day that they left this world was 28 pounds. So each bird consumed 28 pounds of feed in 10.5 weeks. That gave them a feed conversion of 4.73 pounds. So it took 4.73 pounds of feed for every 1 pound that they gained in weight. All in all, the 25 Freedom Rangers ate a total of 700 pounds of feed.
Right, which was 14 bags of feed, 14 50-pound bags.
Right. Now, roosters only. Let's go over some of the information about them at 10.5 weeks. So there were 13 roosters.
Now, there are a couple things that we really can't calculate because obviously we don't know how much feed just the roosters ate and that type of thing. But we did want to give you the weights on just the roosters.
Right, so the roosters, their live weight average was 6.53 pounds. Their average carcass weight was 4.61 pounds. And their live to carcass percentage was 70%, which is not much different than the mixed flock. The mixed flock, yeah, was 71%. So they were definitely bigger overall in both the live weight and the carcass weight. The mixed flock average live weight was 5.92 pounds in comparison to 6.53. And the average carcass weight of the mixed flock was 4.22 pounds versus 4.61 pounds. So there was a difference, but it really wasn't that big of a difference.
No, about a half pound.
Yeah.
About a half pound.
I would have guessed there would be a much bigger difference between the roosters and the hens.
Right. So now let's compare the Cornish to the Freedom Rangers as far as the averages go. So if you remember the Cornish, again, well, the Cornish we butchered at week 8, the Freedom Rangers at week 10.5. So the average weight of the Cornish live weight was 7.06, and the Freedom Rangers 5.92. So a little over a pound more for the Cornish, but again 2 weeks younger.
Right.
The average carcass weight for the Cornish was 5.77 versus 4.22 on the Freedom Rangers, so about a pound and a half bigger at the end for the carcass weight. And the Cornish carcass to live ratio was 82%, so an 18% loss versus a 29% loss on the Freedom Rangers. Now, for the Cornish, the average feed per bird was 18 pounds versus 28 pounds on the Freedom Rangers. So the Cornish ate 10 pounds less per bird and ended up to be bigger birds.
Right.
The feed conversion, and this is really what it all boils down to for me, is the feed conversion. The Cornish had to eat 2.56 pounds of feed for every pound that they gained, and the Freedom Rangers had to eat 4.73 pounds of feed for every pound that they gained. So the Freedom Rangers had to eat almost twice as much food for every pound that they gained. So the average total that the Cornish ate was 451.9 pounds. And that's adjusted to if we had 25 of them. If you remember, we did lose 3 of the Cornish right at the beginning of the experiment within the first week. So they really didn't have time to really eat much. But what I did at the end is I figured out, you know, how much the 23 ate, and then I made that so that it was as if there were still 25 at the end. So the Cornish ate 452 pounds of feed, and the Freedom Rangers ate 700 pounds of feed. So that's quite a difference. 200.
And that's how many bags for the Cornish?
The Cornish was 9 bags of feed, and the Freedom Rangers were 14 bags of feed. So, you know, significant difference there. So that leads us to something that I know a lot of you are interested in, and that is, what was the final breakdown of cost? Now, like I've said before, we're not going to go over exactly our cost, because here in Missouri we buy our feed directly from a feed mill, and we can get it pretty inexpensively compared to other parts of the country. When we lived in Arizona, we paid about 3 times what we pay here in Missouri. So if you remember a couple weeks ago, we asked you guys to give us some input and let us know what you're paying for feed where you live. So I went through all of those comments, and I added up all of those totals, and we came to about an average of about $15 per 50-pound bag. So that's the number we're going to use in our calculations. And hopefully, you know, that will give you guys a good idea. But also, you know, just fill in the blanks with whatever feed costs in your area, and you'll be able to figure out. So let's look at the cost. The Freedom Ranger chicks were more expensive than the Cornish Cross chicks. We ended up, for the 25, we paid $67.75 for the Freedom Ranger chicks, and we paid $55 for the Cornish Cross chicks. Total feed cost for the Freedom Rangers was $210, and for the Cornish Cross, $135. So that brings us to a total cost for the chicks and the feed on the Freedom Rangers of $277.75, and on the Cornish Cross, $190. Now, the average carcass weight of the Freedom Rangers was 4.22 pounds. So if we figure that all out, that means the Freedom Rangers cost us $2.63 per pound to raise. So that's $2.63 for what we actually put in the freezer. Now on the Cornish, the average weight was 5.77 pounds, and that means that they ended up costing us $1.31 per pound. So the Cornish cost, you know, half of what the Freedom Rangers cost. And that is pretty significant.
Yes.
To me personally, even though I know we're not supposed to be giving our opinions quite yet, the Freedom Rangers will have to taste a lot better than the Cornish in order to make me want to pay double for,
right,
and the extra 2.5 weeks of work.
Right.
So we'll see. We'll see next week when we do the taste test. But you know, our goal with this experiment was to provide the facts.
Right.
These are the facts. You can't argue with the numbers. You know, there's different ways to raise them. There's all kinds of variables that could be thrown into this experiment to make things differently. We raised them the way we always raise our meat birds. You know, I know a lot of people had questioned whether or not we were going to let the Freedom Rangers free range instead of just staying in the tractors. The bottom line with that is, if we would have done that, I really feel like they would have grown even slower. Yes, they would have been able to forage, but that forage would not have gotten them to gain the weight the way it did having them in the tractors.
Right.
So
you guys, what a fantastic comparison. Now we know, you guys know, we know the difference from the beginning to the end, the size differences, the cost differences, so that we can all make decisions based on the facts. Now, not next week, but the following week will be our final video. Now, next week is Thanksgiving, and we're having people in town, and you guys are going to be enjoying your family Thanksgiving traditions. So we're going to save the very final video to this series for not next week, but the week after. We look forward to sharing that information with you. We look forward to having the taste test ourselves.
Right.
And kind of diving in a little bit more deeply with a comparison between the full-size carcasses of the Cornish and the full-size carcass of the Freedom Rangers, and maybe a few other comparisons mixed in there.
Right. We plan on taking the meat off the bone on both of them and comparing, you know, how much meat versus bone. Because maybe the Cornish have huge bones.
Right. And
there's not as much meat on there as you think. So we want to do that comparison. And then the blind taste test.
Right, and we do want to we do want to look at the differences in the amount of fat. You know, for some people, a lot more fat is going to be a good thing, and for others, it's going to be a bad thing.
Right.
It just depends on your taste and what you're looking for. So I do want to look at that in some way.
Right. So it's going to be interesting to see that final step, because really that's what it comes down to is, you know, you want to raise healthy, delicious food for your family. And we do have to, you know, it's not all about the money. We have to also take into consideration if one is much better for us than the other.
Right.
So.
And then we will also be talking about, you know, really what our opinion is between both breeds and what we will be raising next year.
Really, and what we kind of observed in raising them, because not to let the cat out of the bag, but there were some differences that I personally experienced in which ones I thought were more pleasurable to raise.
Right.
So we'll talk about that on the next video.
Right.
You guys, if this is your first time visiting our homestead, thank you so much for coming. I hope that you will hit that subscribe button before you leave so you get notified about the end of this series and all of our other videos that we do 5 days a week. Don't forget to share this on all of your social media. And until next time, thanks for stopping by the homestead. Take care and God bless.
God bless.